Liz, I apologize. I did not know I was supposed to. Hey, Dawn. I didn't know I was supposed to log in first. I'm sorry.
Can you mute the, pause the recording, Angela?
Can I pause it?
And there's someone on a phone. Okay. I want to welcome everyone to Off the Shelf. Off the Shelf is a reader presentation or reader event of the Sisters in Crime Atlanta chapter. I want to welcome all those who are new to the chapter or who are zooming in just to see Steve. Dawn Gepfer is going to be your host. Lance Barron will be helping her. Lance is the vice president of the chapter. Dawn is in charge of reader programming. And over in the corner under Sisters in Crime, Angela is our secretary, and she will be helping anyone who has a question. I want to turn your attention to the chat box. I've put our website in there. If you're a crime writer, and you're interested, you need to find your tribe. We're here in Atlanta. Sisters in Crime is a national group that has chapters all over the country. So that syncatlanta.com is our website. You can say hello. I'll put a little bit in the chat. Tell us where you're from. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn.
Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to see you, and I'm very excited that Steve Hodel has agreed to talk with us today, especially since Steve is on the West Coast and it's a Saturday morning and it's 7 a.m. where he is, and he has gotten up early to join us. So thank you so much, Mr. Hodel, for sacrificing your Saturday morning with us.
Good to be with you.
As a means of introduction, I thought that I would start with a very infamous case that is in Los Angeles. Please forgive me, I'm stumbling through this, but there was a murder of a beautiful young woman in the 1940s, 1947 to be exact, a woman named Elizabeth Short, and she was found brutally murdered and her body mutilated in a vacant lot. Now, this happened in 1947. Steve was just a young boy at the time. I think he was, 5, 6, 7 years old when this happened, and zero connection whatsoever to this murder at that time. He grew up in Los Angeles. He ended up entering a career in law enforcement and eventually became a homicide detective for the LAPD. And Steve was celebrated as a law enforcement officer. You can look on his back wall and you see that there's quite a bit of accolades, and he had one of the highest solve rates while he was on the force. And he then he retired, went into private practice and started a private investigation firm. And somewhere along the way in all of this, Mr. Hodel was compelled, for lack of a better word, he was compelled to investigate an unsolved murder from 1947. I've already mentioned it, the Black Dahlia murder of Elizabeth Short. And the story of what led Steve to look into that investigation and try just research it has opened up a Pandora's box for him personally, in his family, as well as his career. He ended up starting an investigative writing series that he has done that details this investigation, and it goes beyond this particular murder. And I'm not doing it justice, so I think the best thing for me to do at this point is to turn this over to Steve and ask him to tell us his story and start with how and why he started looking into Elizabeth Short's unsolved murder from like 50 years. By the time he started looking into it, it was like 50 years old and still unsolved.
Okay, well, you did a great job there, Dawn. I don't really need to say much more. That's about it. Basically, as you said, born and raised in LA, went 4 years into the Navy at 17 to 21, came out and did what a lot of young men my age did then, was join the LAPD. and the new breed, as they said back. And we're talking about I joined LAPD in 63 and retired in 1986. So 23 and a half, almost 24 years on the department. Worked uniform patrol for 6 years, then went into detectives and worked all the different tables: robbery, burglary, sex crimes, juvenile, all of that. And gravitated, I guess, to homicide. 300 murders in my career. I investigated, and we did have a high solve rate in Hollywood, but it wasn't just me. It was a couple of other dedicated detectives working with me. Then I retired, as you say, in 86 and moved up to Bellingham, Washington. I had 2 small boys at the time and want to get out of the big city and the crime. So we went up to Bellingham, Washington, and I opened up a PI, investigative criminal defense. So 24 years on prosecution. Then I started doing criminal defense work, a lot of cases, court appointed, that sort of thing. And so I'm 13 years into retirement, and I get this 2 a.m. phone call. It's my stepmother. She's hysterical. She's in San Francisco. She says, "Your father, the paramedics are here. Your father has just been pronounced dead. Come down." So I flew down to San Francisco a few hours later, did all the things you have to do in the passing of a parent. And the second or third day, I'm with June there, and she walks out and she hands me a small album. And she says, "I think your father would want you to have this." And it's a 3 by 5 inch album, family photos, mother, brothers, sisters, that sort of thing. And there's this beautiful dark-haired young woman reclining semi-nude, or nude actually, I guess, from the waist up. And I said to June, who is this? She says, "I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago." And to this day, I can't explain why, but Black Dahlia comes to mind. It's clearly a picture from the 40s and young, dark hair. And it could have been because there was a movie came out, Who is the Black Dahlia, which was a TV movie in 75. And I had seen that. And I'm thinking maybe my connection was because she looked so similar to that. I don't know, but it kind of came and went. I didn't pay much attention to it. So I'm on the phone to one of the things you need to know about this is my father's background. It's remarkable. I'm going to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to talk about his bio, because you have to understand his background to understand what's coming. Anyway, I'm on the telephone to my half-sister Tamar, same father, different mothers. And we're talking about the great man and his remarkable life. And she says, out of nowhere, she says, "Well, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about, Tamar? Where is this coming from?" Well, Tamar and I had maybe a half-hour conversation in the previous 45, 50 years. I became a cop, and she kind of spun out in sex, drugs, rock and roll, and did her own thing in San Francisco and Hawaii. Anyway, I said, "Well, there's no way." I said, this is ridiculous. With my background, I could show you had nothing to do with it in 10 minutes. So, and I didn't really know much about the Black Dahlia murder. I knew it was a famous unsolved. When I went through the academy, I had seen photographs, the crime scene, and it was a famous whodunit and stuff. But really, I had no connection with it, and that was kind of my only exposure other than seeing this 1975 film. I didn't even know her name, Elizabeth Short. So anyway, basically that started me, and I was going to set out and be able to show my father had nothing to do with this, exonerate him. So this is ridiculous. I made the mistake of following the evidence. And so if it's okay, I'll do a bio on my father.
Oh, please, please.
Remarkable individual. And I was very close to him. And so born in Los Angeles in 1907, raised in South Pasadena area, just outside of Los Angeles, a child prodigy, played his own piano concerts at the Shrine Auditorium at the age of 9. His teacher said he was highly gifted. He's going to become a great concert pianist. He's attending high school in South Pasadena. Not only is he a gifted musician, but he's also intellectually gifted. 186 IQ, 1 point above Einstein. So a high genius. Incidentally, that skips a generation, but my sons are in good shape. And he goes to Caltech, this Caltech Institute University at 14, and is there for a year. Not only is he intellectually gifted and musically gifted, he's also sexually precocious. He has an affair with a professor's wife who gets pregnant, breaks up her marriage. She goes back east and has the child, a girl. Dad at 16 now, or whatever he is, follows her back, says, I love you, I want to marry you. And she says, George, you're a child yourself, get out of my life. This was a terrible mistake. She names the child Folly. And so he comes back to LA. He's obviously asked to leave Caltech after a year. He gets a job, he passes himself off, he's 17 now, and he passes himself off as 21. He gets a job with the LA Record, which is one of the major newspapers in Los Angeles, as a crime reporter. And he starts writing around initially with Vice, which this is during Prohibition. So he's riding around with the Vice guys, they're kicking doors, they're arresting the judge with a young blonde in the speakeasy and stuff. And then he graduates and he starts riding around with LAPD's homicide guys. And same thing, he's going to the murder scenes and he's writing these tabloid stories, the bloody ace of spade next to the body, that sort of thing. He does that for a while, and then he decides, at that time he's double dating, he's still a teenager, and he's double dating with a young man by the name of John Huston. Well, John Huston at that time wasn't the famous director he would become. He was the son of Walter Huston, who was a famous actor, and stage and screen. And they were double dating. John was dating a woman by the name of Emilia, and Dad was dating a woman by the name of Dorothy. Well, after a few weeks, they switch. John falls in love with Dorothy. They go off to Greenwich Village. They get married. And Dad looks at Emilia and says, I guess it's you and me, babe. She gets pregnant. They move north to the Bay Area. He enters medical school at Berkeley. 4 years, goes across the Bay, UCSF, San Francisco, graduates with his medical degree in 1936, and basically has another affair with another woman, and has a Duncan is born, Emily's child is Duncan, he's born in 28. He has an affair with another woman, she gets pregnant, and he has a child 35 by, names her Tamar. That was the half sister that I would later be involved with. Anyway, he then decides he needs some space. He leaves the women and the children, and he goes off to doctor and becomes a soul surgeon at a logging camp in New Mexico and Arizona. And he works on the Indian reservations. By this time, Dorothy, who married John 7 years later now, their marriage falls apart. She's back in LA. He goes to LA, hooks back up with Dorothy, Houston's ex-wife. And my older brother, Michael, is born in 39. I come along in 41. And my younger brother, Kelly, comes along in 42. So Dad joins the LA County Health Department, quickly rises to the top, becomes the VD czar of the health department in Los Angeles. He buys this rather unique home. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the Soden House. It was built by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. I don't know if we'll see, can we see this? I don't know. It's kind of hard to see, I suppose. Anyway,
I
a
can
very
see it.
unique architecture in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And you've seen it in probably a number of different films it's been used for. And we all move into the Soden House, which we call the Franklin House. It was on Franklin Avenue. And so we're the three little princes running around, George is the king, mother's the queen, and it's fantasy time, it's magic time for us little boys. Everything's going along swimmingly. And then in 1949, there's a knock at the door, and it's LAPD. Dr. Hodel, yes, you're under arrest for incest. So Dad is arrested for incest with my half sister Tamar, the one, she was 14 at the time, down there visiting us for the summer. She alleges, she runs away, they pick her up and she discloses, they said, why did you run away? Because my life's so terrible. She discloses having sex with our father and some other individuals, 2 women and another man in the bedroom. Big headlines, head of LA County Health Department arrested. He gets Jerry Geisler, who was a famous defense attorney of the day and kind of a Johnny Cochran of his day. And he defends him. There's a 3-week trial. They basically paint Tamar with a pathological liar brush, not to be believed. Anyway, the jury comes back not guilty. Dad leaves, shortly after that, Dad leaves the country. We're now into 1950. Goes to Hawaii for a couple of years, marries a wealthy Filipina, has 4 more children, basically goes to Manila and in Asia for 40 years, comes back to Los Angeles, divorces her, marries another woman by the name of June, comes back to San Francisco in 1990. And that's when I hooked back up with him. And for the last decade of his life, we become very close. So he's now got 11 children by 5 different women, has had this incredible life. And go figure, I was his favorite, go figure. And we become very close. And so I'm off to show that he had nothing to do, this is ridiculous, he had nothing to do with this crime. Yeah, I believe I know the sexual thing happened, but murder, no way, especially. So I basically realized I can't do an absentee investigation. I moved back to LA in 90, he died in 99. I moved back in 2000 and spent the next 20 years investigating. Basically, my first book came out, Black Dahlia Avenger came out in 2003. And the rest of the 8 or 9 books are basically an ongoing investigation. Not only was I much surprised that he actually committed that crime and put it all together, I submitted it in secret to a head deputy district attorney in LA. And much to my surprise, he was a serial killer. It wasn't just the one crime. There was about a dozen lone woman murders in that time period in Los Angeles. I don't know if you can see this. Can we see this? Anyway, this shows 9 women in a very tight geographical area in the Hollywood and Los Angeles area. And I would link him to many of those crimes with pretty strong circumstantial evidence. The DA reviewed my case for 6 months, said, yeah, he said, you're probably right about the 9. He says, but I would file on 2 cases. I would file on Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and I would file on Jean French, which was another murder where the body was posed on a vacant lot about 5 miles west. He says, those could take to court and I would win in a jury trial based on your investigation and evidence. The others, you're probably right, but not enough. I have a high filing. So with that, I wrote the book. It came out, Black Dahlia Avenger, in 2003. And I kept ongoing investigations on the other crimes and have just basically finished the early years. In other words, I realized he didn't wake up at age 40 and say, I think I'll be a serial killer. So I've just published in November, I came out with the 2 early years books, which cover the 20s and 30s and his crimes in and around Los Angeles and throughout California. So basically, and that resulted in a lot of documentaries and interviews, and half the world said, oh, this is a daddy dearest. The other half said, no, this is a slam dunk. And the evidence has kept building. and it just increases and increases to where we're way beyond reasonable doubt on the Black Dahlia and many of the other crimes. And so that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of where we are. And one of the problems was, so I had established I had made my bones on the Dahlia case, and pretty much 90% of the readers got it. And they said, yeah, this is definitely solved. And the kicker was basically an LA columnist, Steve Lopez, who was a well-known columnist for the LA Times, did a couple of quick articles on my initial investigation. And he went to the DA or he went to LAPD and said, hey, there's this Hodel. He says his daddy killed the Black Dahlia, blah, blah, blah. And LAPD says, go away. We don't talk about open cases, right? This is a case they haven't looked at in 55, 60 years. So he goes to the head DA, Steve Cooley in LA, and he says, hey, there's this Hodel, Black Dahlia, blah, blah, blah. And Cooley says, well, I ain't spending a dime of taxpayers' money on a 50-year-old case. Says, but there is a file in the vault on the Black Dahlia. Would you like to see that? And Lopez says, yeah. They go downstairs, open the vault, gives him the box, goes upstairs to a room, opens it up, out falls a picture of Dr. George Hill Hodel. Whoa, he was a suspect. And he did a quick and dirty article. He finds some transcripts, and that he was focused on as actually the prime suspect all along. So I go to Cooley and I say, can I see the file? And Cooley says, yeah, I guess I have to let you. And I copy everything. And what do we find out? We find out that not only was he the prime suspect from the get-go on the Black Dahlia, but they secretly tape recorded. They picked him up, took him in to talk to him. And while he's in the Hall of Justice, they go out and they wire the house for sound, not telephone taps, but actual recordings in the living room, in the bedroom. They stake out 18 detectives 24/7 around the clock, and they get some complete admissions to it. They're listening, staked out, of all places, in the basement of the Hollywood station where I worked most of my career. Anyway, they're listening to the tapes 24/7 in shifts. And he's talking to one of his close friends, and this Baron Haringa, and he says to the Baron, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now. My secretary's dead. Well, LAPD 2 years before investigated him for suspecting he overdosed his secretary. So, and then he goes on and makes admissions, and then he shortly after that flees the country. Anyway, a lot of different admissions, 146-page transcript on the tape recordings, which I print in my book. So basically, we have a cop out to the Black Dahlia murder and the secretary. He actually cops out on tape. So very solid case. 90% I say, okay, I'm convinced. And that led me to, as I'm investigating some of the other ones, there's actually a lot of interesting parts to his MO, as we say, and one of them was murder as a fine art. And the posing of Elizabeth Short's body, I'm not going to go into all the gruesome details, but it was one of the reasons why it became one of the most famous whodunits on LAPD. It was they estimate a 4-hour torture. She was surgically bisected. Blood was drained from her body. She was washed clean. The 2 separate parts were transferred to this vacant lot from a home. Actually, the crime scene turns out to be our Franklin Soden house, transported to this vacant lot, posed in a very unique fashion, the arms above the head in like a surrender position, and then the lower half was juxtaposed just inches away. And this was to mimic a good friend of his. Our family photographer was a man by the name of Man Ray. I don't know how many of you listeners know this, but Man Ray was a famous surrealist photographer. And basically, Dad part of his pathology was that he truly believed that there was no difference between the waking state and the dream state. This was one of his, part of his sickness was that the surrealists believe this, and they talk the talk and had their wine, but Dad actually walked the walk. He believed there was no difference between, you know, the dream and the waking state, and you could do anything. He was a nihilist. He was a sadist in the extreme. He was a misogynist extreme. So all of these things came together in this boy genius in his twisted mind, and became, you know, basically I'm at over 50 years of killing. I'm at 50 victims I've located from 1921 to 1969. So that's basically a quick and dirty overview. One of the very controversial parts of my investigation was I go from Black Dahlia and the LA lone woman murders. It leads me to a Chicago murder, lipstick murders. There were 3 victims there. And basically a 17-year-old boy was arrested, imprisoned by the name of William Hirons. And he spent 64 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit, but a crime my father did commit. And I present a very strong, compelling case showing he was innocent. I actually went back and talked to Degnan while he was still alive. He died in prison just some years ago. But 64 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit. And basically I put that together and I follow the evidence, and that leads me to a crime in Manila that Dad committed while he was living there. And it's a Black Dahlia, copycat Black Dahlia. Not copycat, he did it himself. So basically a nude woman, bisected, posed on a vacant lot about 2 miles from his house. And that from there, that took me to Dad. Let's see if I have my street signs here. But basically, Dad was taunting the police. He was sending in many taunts and notes, kind of like ransom notes, concealed. And basically, let's see. So in the 1943 Chicago murders, the little girl's name was Suzanne Degnan, Degnan, a name I've never even heard before. So what he does is he poses, again, part of his secret taunts, he poses Elizabeth Short's body off a street named Degnan, okay, referring back to the crime a year before. And then he poses another victim, the Jean French murder, off a street called Mountain View. Well, Elizabeth Short's body was buried at Mountain View Cemetery. And this was just 2 weeks later, he commits his crime. So you've got Degnan, you've got Mountain View. And then we go to the Manila murder, and he poses the body off a street named Zodiac. And I'm saying to myself, no way, there's no way. Zodiac. I didn't know much about Zodiac. We were busy with Manson back at the same time. So basically I said, and I didn't know much about it, but I looked it up and he said, no, this is a guy 25 years old. There's no way. Well, come to find out, I said, well, I'll look at it. So I get into the weeds of the Zodiac murder and come to find out there are 2, again, it's the hard part is breaking through the myth and the public perception and what they believe. There were 2 more composites made of Zodiac, and that most people have never seen. And it's a much older man. Let's see if you can see this. Let's see.
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Uh-huh.
So the sketch on the right is an official police sketch of an much older man, of course, a man in his 45 to 50. Well, Dad at the time was 60, but he could easily pass for 45 or 50, very easily. And of course, it's almost picture perfect. So I thought, oh no, there's no way. I come out with a book called Most Evil. And I don't say Dad did his Zodiac. I say, here's a lot of things. Let's do his DNA. There are a lot of things here. Well, fast forward another 6 months and I get a contact from Paris, France, a high school teacher. And there's a symbol that Zodiac sent in. Again, he was taunting, just like Zodiac, just like Dahlia. He was taunting, I think he wrote a total of 21 letters, taunts. Anyway, on one of these, there was a mysterious symbol and nobody has to this day has figured it out. So I get a contact from this French high school teacher who says, hey, this symbol is an ancient Celtic language, and it's got 5 letters, and the 5 letters are HODEL.
I just got chills.
And there's much more to it. We don't have time to go through all the evidence and linkage, but that definitely got my attention. And we're actually I'm working now with a production company, and we're actually going to have a mini series come out, hopefully end of this year. I'm not sure when. We've got about 40 hours of interviews with me in the can already, and now we're going to resume and finish it up. So it's real exciting. We've got T-Bone Burnett's going to do the music, and Nick Pizzolatto, who did True Detective 1, 2, and 3. He was the writer and creator of that. He's on board. And so I'm real excited that, basically that's going to happen, and we can break through the myth and really get, and also the murders of fine art is a huge part of the story. I mean, it just goes on, and we really are able to get into the mind of the pathology of George Hodel and see how it all comes together in his twisted version. So I'm very excited about it, and I've just come out recently in November, I published the early years, which covers his crimes in the 20s and 30s. He didn't wake up at age 40 and say, I think I'll be a serial killer. So, and I leave it to the reader to decide which of these are good or not, whether he did or not. I'm not making a call, I'm just presenting the evidence and leaving you to be the judge and jury. So that's kind of where we're at for now. I'm sorry that was a long narrative, Dawn, but it's a lot to tell.
It is, and I struggled with how do I introduce you and give your story justice, and that's why I thought it was best to let you do it. So I'm glad you did go into that kind of detail, because it is fascinating. I told you that when we were exchanging emails, that I felt like your story of, not just your investigation, but the fact that it ended up being tied, this very fascinating, interesting story that has haunted us for 75 years. 75 years this year is the how many years we've been waiting to bring justice for Elizabeth Short. And so there was no better way to do that than for you to talk about your journey to get to that point. And a couple of things have come to my mind while you were chatting. Like, one thing, when you mentioned that the house was bugged, that was your house. Yes. Where you lived.
Yes. And some of your viewers your members may have seen I Am the Night.
Yeah.
Which was a mini series, and it was 95% fiction. I had nothing to do with it. I was not involved in that. It was it was supposed to be the life of Fauna Hodel, who was Tamar's daughter. And she wrote a book called Someday She'll Darken, or Someday She'll Darken, I think it was. Anyway, that was about her life, which is interesting. Well, after my publication, they decided, unbeknownst to me, first time I was aware of it was when I saw the trailer, was, well, let's pull the Black Dahlia, Steve's investigation of the Black Dahlia in and fictionalize it and stuff, which they did. So I'm anxious, I'm all about getting the truth out there. And so I was a little upset with the fictionalization of it, because Fauna never met my father. She was never at the Soden house until long after his death. And so that was kind of a lot of misrepresentation. But for me, it's a wonderful home in the sense that it was, as I said earlier, magic time for us kids. It was just fantasy, and we loved it. And there were all kinds of parties. Of course, Dad was very connected to a lot of the Hollywood elite, and Houston by then had become, Maltese Falcon had been made, and he was, they remained very close until Dad split and stuff. So, and of course had been married to Mom earlier. And actually, of the three of them, Mom was she was a screenwriter, a script doctor, I guess you'd say. And actually, for those familiar with Treasure of Sierra Madre, there's that scene with Robert Blake, the little boy, and the lottery tickets in the bar. Well, Mom wrote that scene because John came to her and said, you got boys. He says, this doesn't work for us. Can you fix it? So she actually fixed that scene, which was really cool. Remarkable woman in many respects. Tragic, out of the fire with John into the frying pan with George. She was an alcoholic, but at the same time, a brilliant mind, smarter than both of them put together. And I hope we can get some of her, the positive parts of her out there to the public too, because she was truly remarkable. Very beautiful woman. Let's see if I can get this Man Ray over here. I have it. No, I'm not seeing it, but anyway, like I said, the other thing I might throw in, just here's a picture of it. You can see it. Let's see if you can see it. Can you see it?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a Man Ray photograph. And the other thing that's important to realize, it's not just Steve Hodel that's saying case solved. Here we have four of the highest LAPD officials and law enforcement. And I'll just read you, these are direct quotes. Chief Parker, who was our most famous police chief in LAPD, we identified the Black Dahlia suspect. He was a doctor. Chief of Detectives Thad Brown, the Black Dahlia case was solved. He was a doctor who lived on Franklin Avenue in Hollywood. Lieutenant Jemison of the DA's office, we know who the Black Dahlia killer was. He was a doctor, but we didn't have enough to put him away. Yeah, they did. And then finally, the undersheriff of Los Angeles, speaking to Downey was his name. The Black Dahlia case was solved. It'll never come out. Suspect was a doctor they all knew in Hollywood involved in abortions. So these are all independent, separate statements by all of the top law enforcement. So the truth is the case was solved, is solved, but not cleared. So that's the difference. And LAPD, there's a lot more to it. Back then, LAPD was very corrupt, as was Chicago, as were all of the departments. And Parker came along and wanted to clean up Dodge. And he was literally weeks away from when this thing with the tape recordings went down. And so they basically covered it up. He wanted to take off office. He knew if this came out, it would blow him out of the water. He wouldn't be able to clean up. So they just locked it away and never came back to it. For the good of the city, for the good of themselves, the department. And so it wasn't until 53 years later that we get the secret files.
So for the good of the city and the good of the department, but to the detriment of all these victims, because your father was able to continue his crime spree.
That's where they have the blood on their hands, is there would be no Zodiac. There would be no 8 or 10 more victims. There would be no Lucilla Lalou in Manila, Yeah, that's where, I, as a career law enforcement officer, my blood boils on the fact that they didn't pursue it.
And of course, as you said, things eventually did get cleaned up. There was a lot of notoriety around the corrupt police, in many cities in the 40s and 50s. And so by the time you're a police officer, there is credibility to the work and everything. So there's a couple of probably emotional challenges I would imagine that you have. Number one, you have this career that you've dedicated your life to, and you have a father that you said you became close with and probably loved. I'm not going to say adored, but you probably loved him.
Yep.
And in an attempt to exonerate him, as you said, and prove that your half sister is loopy, right? Which everybody had already discredited her anyway. you unfortunately find out that there was some validity to her accusation. And I can just imagine the emotional side of that. You don't have to talk about it, but do you want to talk
Sure.
about what
Yeah,
you went
it
through
was
emotionally?
Yeah, it was a real challenge for me because, as you say, I was a loving son and I was determined to, but at the same time, I was also a trained, skilled homicide investigator. So it was, in a way, I was psychologically bisected as Elizabeth was physically, in the sense of you've got the loving son who's determined that he's going to show his father had nothing to do with it. And you got the trained, objective detective, homicide detective, who's going to follow the evidence. And so I had to make that different, I had to make that just keep them separate. I couldn't allow this son to contaminate whatever evidence the detective was going to find. So it was two paths. And the other thing was, I knew very little about my father. He was very mysterious. I had everything that I've related to you, basically, I didn't know. And I had to find out on my journey. So it was two paths. It was a son following a path to discover who his mysterious father was, and another path of the criminal investigation. So yeah, and to this day, I've been through every possible emotion you can go through. Anger, hatred, frustration, and basically now after 23 years of investigation, I've just wound up with just a terrible sadness, and this boy genius, clearly I'm absolutely convinced that he was a victim of probably incest, probably his mother, if not his mother, another family member, and his rejection, here you got a young boy, genius, and his peers are rejecting him because who's this nerdy, freaky kid, and so there are a whole lot of things and a lot of stuff we'll never know that, impacted his life that created this monster. And I mean, I'm not aware of anyone that's been any serial killer that equals him in the sense of what he did, for 50 years. And you say he got away. Well, he didn't really get away with it. They knew. And there are other ones in the early years, the same thing. We come across corruption and overlooking it and ignoring it, and where he should have been arrested. So, and the sad thing is, in the early years, the horrific one, if it wasn't bad enough with William Hiron, 64 years for a crime that Dad did, there's actually some executions in the early years where a wrongful suspect is executed on a crime dad. So, it's one of the reasons I'm an advocate against the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically because of wrongful convictions. Mm-hmm. And, anyway, that's, but yeah, psychologically, I mean, I guess it's been therapeutic for me to write. And, I never intended to be a writer. I mean, I was pulled into this. This came to me, I didn't go to it. And so, it's been, I guess, a way therapeutic to through my writings. I do cover quite a bit of personal psychological examinations and stuff too in my writings.
Well, Steve, could you talk a little bit about the transition from doing the investigation to deciding you're going to write a book about it?
Yeah, well, I went to the DA and submitted my evidence, and I thought, well, if he comes back, with not enough, I'll just go back to Bellingham, move back to Bellingham, and resume my work. But I also knew I'd made the case. So when he came back and said, yeah, I'd file on these, at that point I said, okay, well, I've got to tell this story. I'm going to write it. And I mean, you develop writing skills as an investigator, of course, because you're presenting crimes to the district attorney all the time. And maybe I got some of my mother's writing genes. At any rate, I decided to tell the story, and because it's an important story, and it's far strange. It's fact far stranger than fiction, and you couldn't make this up. I don't think the mind would even go there. So I just sat down and basically, after the DA said gave a green light on he'd prosecute, I sat down and just wrote it up. The first one, I had no idea that it would be 7 books, 8 books later, you know, with all of these other crimes that kept unfolding. And the other thing I want to say is I had a lot of help from a lot of readers. They were armchair detectives, if you will. I mean, some of these men and women could be my partner anytime, and I include them in and I present what their findings were. And some of them are just, well, of course, we talked about the Frenchman, you know, Yves Persson, who came up with the solution on the cipher on Zodiac. But there were all kinds of individual citizen readers who came up with, well, what about this, and stuff that I had missed, they got. So it's a really a joint effort by many readers that have contributed amazing discoveries.
We do have some questions
Yeah.
from our audience. Angela, you want to take it away?
Yes, one of the questions is, did you ever think about stopping your investigation because it was so painful to discover that your father wasn't who you thought he was?
Short answer, no. Basically, you know, I'm wired to pursue the truth. And in every case, in every homicide case, you kind of have to remove the emotional part of you from your investigation. So in a way, you could say I was well prepared, even though it was my father. I was well prepared, you know, just by the hundreds of investigations I'd done, is to remove myself. You know, you get that 2 a.m. call, you go in and a father is beating a 6-year-old son to death. And he's in custody, and you go in and you sit down and give him a cup of coffee, a cigarette, and let's talk about this. There's got to, you know, you have to remove that anger and repulsion, or you're not going to make your case very well. So in a way, I was kind of prepared from the get-go.
Another question is, now the Black Dahlia murder, it happened before you were born, correct?
No, after I was 6 years old.
Okay, were you living in that house when it happened?
Yes,
You were?
but well, not during the crime. The DA reports, that was one of the things that bothered me. How he couldn't commit a crime with mother and children there. Well, in the DA reports, it actually shows that we were not there during a 3-week period. He was there alone, that we were actually living with my mother's brother, so my uncle, for that, during that period in January of 47. We were actually gone for 3 weeks, so he was there alone.
Do you recall why you were living with your mother's brother? Like, was it a family vacation or?
No, he lived just 3 miles away, so we were in Los Angeles, and you know, we weren't there. We were kind of in and out a lot. Mom was transient, and another thing I discovered is that they were actually divorced. I didn't know. They married in 39 and were divorced in 44 or 45. So we were kind of living there at his will and stuff. And I didn't know this. I just assumed when he left in 50, Mom was still married to him. But I actually discovered the divorce papers and stuff. And we were kind of transient in and out, you know, mostly stayed there a lot, and Mom had some drinking problems, and we were actually taken into custody a couple of times for child neglect because of her, you know, she'd go on a binge and stuff. So it was, and I write a whole chapter or 2 on the gypsy years. We kind of bounced all around after Dad split, you know, and it was a tough time. And I joined the Navy at 17 when I turned 17 and 7 seconds, you know. So yeah, so it was a good and bad thing, you know.
But do I understand correctly that he did the torture and murder in that house?
Yes. In fact, since then, again, like I say, the ongoing investigation, I actually had an opportunity to have a canine cadaver dog actually alerted to human remains at the Soden house, in the basement, and we got soil samples. We sent those into the body farm, and they came back positive for human remains. And you know, it's been very frustrating for me because I send all this to LAPD, and the detective assigned to the case says, "Well, we're too busy to look at it." Well, the truth is they do not want to confirm. LAPD wants no part of this. They don't want to confirm that their 2 greatest heroes, Chief Parker and Chief Thad Brown basically covered this up. And the kicker, and I forgot to mention this, but actually the reason for it is there was a murder on tape during this 6-week taping. There was actually a murder committed. I'm reading the transcript and I can't believe it. It says George Hodel and the Baron Haringa go downstairs to the basement. A thud is heard. A woman screams. More blows are heard. A woman screams again. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, they're 6 minutes away from the house in Hollywood. Why aren't they out the door and doing a rescue? They do nothing. Why? Hard to say. I can only assume that, you know, basically these are the third day of the stakeout. The detectives say, what do we do? Should we call Lieutenant? And, you know, what do we do? And they maybe tried to call him and he wasn't home or whatever. And basically they did nothing. So basically, I think this was the main reason for the cover-up, was that, and you got to understand the corruption and the timing of LA. Parker was literally weeks away from assuming command to clean up Dodge. I think that Midnight Oil was burnt and they made this Machiavellian decision. Well, look, let's, you know, lock this away for now. We'll come back to it in the future, but for now, I'll take command and we'll clean up Dodge. I think that's what happened. And, but I mean, it's quite remarkable that they recorded for another 5 weeks. Yeah. And so.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Keith has said that both Fauna and Tamar have stated George did not kill Elizabeth Short. Do you
Fauna
recall that?
No. Tamar, when I'm talking to her on the phone on a disclosure, she says to me, you know, yeah, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia, but he didn't do it, she says.
Oh.
And so she definitely believed he didn't do it. And I said, well, where is this coming from, Tamar? She says, well, the detectives, that LAPD detectives that took me to court back and forth during the trial said they thought he was the killer of the Black Dahlia. Well, Tamar, you know, there was some other woman that said that wrote a book, My Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer. Janice Knowlton, I think her name was. Well, Tamar contacted her and apparently she said, no, my daddy did it. My daddy's name is George. So Tamar just assumed that her daddy did it and never, never felt any other reason. So Tamar didn't really think that George did it until my investigation. And of course, when she saw all the evidence, she saw the truth of it.
That was one of my questions too, is how do your siblings feel about your work and what you've uncovered?
Well, like I say, there's 11 children. And so Tamar passed away, but she was totally on board. She passed away a few years ago. My two full brother, my older brother, Mike, passed away before any of this came to light. He was a remarkable individual himself. Anyway, and my younger brother, Kelly, is totally on board. He's Irish twins. He's 11 months younger than me. And the 4 Filipino children, no, that wasn't our dad. He couldn't do something like that. So they're not on board. I mean, I don't know, now that all the evidence is out, I haven't had communication with them. So, it's kind of mixed, half and half, I guess. And the problem is you got to kind of read all 8 or 9 books to get the full picture. And a lot of people aren't willing to read 9 books, it's really one ongoing investigation. And that's why I'm hoping that the miniseries will condense it to, make it understandable and cover everything we can in 4 or 5 episodes. I don't know.
So Keith also mentions that there was evidence that your father had a heart condition that would have made it impossible for him to be the killer.
Not true. I mean, he had a heart condition, but he was also very physically fit, and he used that as a kind of an excuse. In other words, in the summer of 49, when Tamar came down, he argued, he says, oh, I have a heart condition, I don't want to take care of her and stuff. Anyway, Tamar's mother insisted, and he did. And he never really had, late in life he did, but he was very active and very strong, a very powerful man physically. And he never really had until 80s he'd come up and visit, he and June would come up and visit me regularly. I would visit them in San Francisco in that last decade. And he was strong and powerful. Ultimately, he did it worsened and worsened. And finally they attempted to afibrillation or whatever it is to try, and it didn't work. So actually he committed suicide. He wrote prescriptions, Seconal, for June, in which he accumulated enough of them. He overdosed himself, and it wasn't out of remorse. It was because he was fearful that he would be paralyzed and it would, eat up all their savings. And June was 40 years younger than him. She was younger than me, and they were married 30 years. So he basically decided, he even talked to me about what I thought about euthanasia. I said, well, there are certainly conditions when it's appropriate, I think, and anyway, and that was like a year or two before. Anyway, he took his life, but he was actually quite strong and powerful up until about his 80s. And then there was, but certainly in 47, he was, no problems.
Well, and also, just speculation. I think you said that like from the 1920s until the end of the 60s was when he was active. And so maybe there is something that's what slowed him down, or we just haven't discovered what else he did beyond that, but, at one point he did stop, supposedly.
Right. But he was 60, he was 69, so he was 62. And I think he's also, that's when June entered his life. And so I think she was a very positive effect. Got him off the booze, got him off the cigarettes, eating healthy. And I think she was a huge influence on turning him around.
We do have one more question, and Edie is curious, how responsible was your father with all of his children? And did he pay child support for all 11, or was he?
I can't speak to the Filipino side. They didn't need any help. His wife, Hortensia Stark, was a congresswoman in the Philippines and very wealthy. She owned a large plantation in south of Manila in Negros Occidental. And so she was very wealthy. I think she was a cousin to the vice president earlier years. So there was no financial problem on that side. As far as helping mom, not really. He never really paid. He was supposed to pay $200 a month or something back when they were divorced in 40s. But he never really, occasionally he'd send, a little money, but not on any regular basis. So mom was left to fend for herself, and it was tough times for us. And he wasn't, he had this image of being very wealthy, in a 39th floor penthouse suite in San Francisco and all that. The truth is, when I got into it, actually, he made executor of his estate June helped me, and we both did it. And he actually had, maybe, I think it was 400,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in today's world.
Right.
Everybody thinks he's a billionaire or a multi-millionaire. He wasn't. He spent it as fast as he got it, and lived a very high lifestyle. So yeah.
He lived large, for sure.
He lived large, and he wanted everybody to, that perception, costs money too. So.
Angela, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have a couple more. One is, since he wasn't convicted, there was no restitution to any of the families, correct?
Right. He to this day, LAPD says it's an unsolved case. It's not unsolved, and it is solved, but they're not going to acknowledge it. And And I've asked them 4 times through 3 chiefs now of changing over the years to just, do the DNA. Let's do, here's the case. And they don't want any part of it because, again, they don't want to confirm. So all they can do is, and what they do is say, we're too busy. We're working on active cases. We're too busy to look at it.
Well, have you been in
Stated.
contact with the families of any of the victims?
One of the victims, San Diego victim, some relatives I was in contact with, but I haven't. Elizabeth Short's family she had 4 sisters, and they're all have passed. And basically, all kinds of books came out and stuff. I did, solving the case. So I think they were just sick and tired of hearing anything, and they didn't want any part or connection with anybody. So I figured if they want to contact me, fine, but no, there's been no real contact.
Do you have did you have any problem reconciling the man you knew with the man that did this?
Yeah, I did. Basically, I mean, I knew Dad was, had his problems, and I knew that mainly they were sexual. I mean, he was, I knew he was good for the incest with Tamar, and he was a serial marriager. He was married serial times, and was a powerful force in his life. But I never dreamt he could be that. The misogynist and the nihilist and all of that, I never had a real insight into that until I got into the crimes themselves and began to realize, how pathologically messed up he was. So it was hard for me to go from loving son to discovering this monster, but it's, part of, it's also been the detective in me, the guy that wants to solve crimes and discover who done it. It's been exciting. I mean, frankly, it's been rewarding to discover and and solve these crimes. That's what I did my whole career, and so that part of me was, I have to admit, was interested and determined. Determined to get to the truth of it.
I'm curious, Steve, if this had come to you while your father was still alive, do you think you would have investigated? I mean, I can see where you would start the investigation to prove, well, that's not true. Dad didn't do that, but once you started to discover the truth, if your father was still alive, do you think you would have, the detective in you would have still won the battle, the 2 wolves inside?
Yeah, I don't think it would have, I could have solved it with him living. I don't think I'd be able to have found out the things I discovered, or that, I talked to a lot of people and I had a lot of help, and a lot of that may not have been revealed were he still alive. Yeah. He was a powerful force for evil, and he was, people were scared of him. I mean, there was that whole inner circle. Houston and a lot of the screenwriters and others back in those days knew. Actually, all of the surrealists knew that he did it. There's a whole multiple chapters where I present. They actually paid the surrealists, Man Ray and others paid Copley and paid homage to George through artwork, they acknowledging that they knew that he was the killer. So this is was another whole thing, and they were all in fear of their lives. Nobody wanted contact with him after that. Houston, all of them. So I don't think it could have been solved while he was living.
So before you go, we know that you've written multiple books, and as you said, it's an ongoing continuation. If we do want to start at the beginning and work our way through, do you recommend we start with your first book and then go to the second and follow them in sequential order as they were written?
Actually, if you go to my website, stevehodel.com, and there's and go to the squad room. I've been blogging for 15 years, and all kinds of a massive amount of evidence is presented there. Also, the reading order is suggested, and certainly you start with Black Dahlia Avenger, the 2003 book, but there's a certain order that's probably better to and I give that on there. I listed on the books.
Mhm. Well,
Steve,
go ahead, Lance, sorry.
You want to give just a quick plug for In the Mesquite?
I'm sorry.
Your book, In the Mesquite.
Oh, In the Mesquite. Yeah. As I was investigating, I was going to do the early years. I thought it would be one book. And then I came across a crime in, while he was a young surgeon in Arizona and New Mexico. I came across a double homicide of mother and daughter in just outside of El Paso, Texas. And I started looking at that, and I realized there's too much here I thought it'd be the last chapter. It was in 1938. And I thought, well, I'll make it a separate book. So I did In the Mesquite, which is the mother and daughter murder, one of the serial crimes in El Paso. And you'll see how that all comes together. And then, but I was going to make it the last chapter in the book, and I said, no, this is going to be a book in itself. So that's available In the Mesquite as a separate double homicide. Thank you for bringing that up.
And that's one that your father did, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still connected to the overall story.
Yeah, it was going to, like I say, it's supposed to be the last chapter in the early years, but it's a separate book instead. So.
Well, I'm certainly fascinated. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been following you and your work for a while, ever since I discovered that you were looking into it. And it's funny that you mentioned that 1975 movie, Who is the Black Dahlia? And because that was the movie that introduced me to the story at all. And Lucy Arnaz was the actress who played Elizabeth Short.
Right.
And I remember that I was 10. And I remember that. My dad was not happy that I watched that movie. He wasn't home. And when he got home, I was like, oh my gosh, they killed her. And he said, you are not watching TV when I am not home anymore.
Yeah, it's fairly accurate for the most part. I mean, there are a few things that aren't, but basically, and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. plays Harry Hansen, who was one of the two primary detectives initially on the case. And they do a pretty good job. I haven't seen James Ellroy's Black Dahlia, and I have no real interest. It's all fiction and stuff. So, but hopefully we'll be able to get the truth out on film with this miniseries, which I'm excited.
What is the name of the miniseries so we know to look for it?
Don't know yet. They've got Hodel is the working title, but I don't know where it's going to go.
Okay. Well, if we follow your blog, we'll be kept in the loop on that. So I'm certainly looking forward to it. And as I said, thank you so much for joining us today. Does anybody have anything, any last questions so that we can let Mr. Hodel get on with his Saturday?
No, but I'd just
Steve.
like to say from Sisters in Crime, maybe in the future we can contact you about doing maybe a program with the whole chapter about your investigative skills, being a private detective or being your homicide detective skills, and a nonfiction writer too. So those are all the topics that, our chapter, Sisters in Crime is different from most other writer groups because we're crime writers. So we really like the details, and some of them even like the gory stuff. Not me so much, but other writers like that.
Yeah, I've done some meetings with Sisters in Crime chapter out in Los Angeles years ago, and I always enjoy it. They're always good questions, and people that actually like to read books.
Yeah, well, I used to read true crime when I was younger, but as I got older, I was like, nah, I can't deal with feeling like there are murderers as my next door neighbors. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed talking with you, and usually I do it with a PowerPoint, which because there's so many visuals, so many graphics that really tell the story, and it makes it a lot easier. And but I do have a tendency to go on and on because there's so much to cover.
So much
But
detail.
it's a pleasure, and I'm happy to have joined you this morning.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
So we've got a recording of this. We will be posting it to our YouTube channel. So you guys can, and we'll share that link with you, Steve, so that if you're interested in sharing it on your
Sure.
platforms, you can.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll put it up.
Okay. And Liz will let you close us out.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And figure out
Bye,
how to
everybody. Just, we'll see you in, at the April chapter meeting.